All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Let's make sure got everything together. It's an educational channel, and we try to tune you into some great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, as well as cosmologies, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries. All of them are generally coming from obscure sources, and some of them are ancient, some of them are modern. But they're people in general who spent a good chunk of their life dedicated to this truth that they're trying to get out, this all-encompassing truth. And they probably never got recognized. Nobody knows who they are anymore. If ever, and they didn't get paid. But they did it because it was the truth, or they thought it was. And in general, you know, the search for truth is a battle of approximations. You know, you try to get closer and closer to the truth. You may never arrive at the truth, but you can continue to get closer and closer. And it's I don't know, it just seems like the closer you get, it's kind of an exponential thing. Like you get, it seems like diminishing returns, excuse me, like a diminishing returns kind of situation. Like it takes way too much energy to keep getting closer. But the closer you get, the benefits begin to start multiplying. But anyway, you know, we hope this helps you out with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of holistic worldview, and your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health, and personal sovereignty. Today is our 258th video on the unit that we're calling the Reciprocal Church, named after the great all-encompassing theory, my favorite, the reciprocal system of theory, from one Dewey Bernard Larson. And Mr. Larson, through all of his books and conferences and articles, and some of his colleagues, really put together a theory of everything that unifies all the sciences, all the major branches of science. And it also unifies science with religion. And so we're kind of trying to fill in that religious aspect. You know, he kind of alluded to some clues in his last book, Beyond Space and Time, but he didn't really flesh out everything that kind of goes into the spiritual practice. And so we're looking at some other sources who have put together things that you can use in your own life, and you can verify their theories in your own comfort of your own home. Generally, you can. These are things that you can believe in because you can verify them. You can replicate them. You know, do them again. You can. Oftentimes put equations to them, simple or complex. And, you know, you don't have to take somebody else's word for it. You can build these things into your own practice, pragmatically and syncretically. So, you know, maybe now we have 3 major Western religions and, you know, a handful of Eastern religions, but I think I see a future of us having approximately 8 billion different religions, or by the time we get there, maybe 10 billion different religions. It's an individual thing that you feel in your heart, and you can tap into that. But all of us are going to describe it a little bit differently, and we're kind of putting this together because we see the impending doom that the major religions are about to befall especially the Western religions. And what we're looking at today is a book by Michael Menescott called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. Now, this is not my field of study. My father actually went to a seminary school when he was young, and that turned him into a complete atheist. And so I wasn't raised in the church. Had been to church maybe 10 times in my life. Every time with my grandfather, who was on my mother's side, who was a preacher, minister for the Church of Christ. And I remember my dad and my grandfather having, I don't know that I could call them debates, but at the kitchen table, he would have his Bible open and my dad would kind of, and then when he did take me to church, he was, the church, it wasn't like going to Catholic church. I had a lot of Catholic friends, and a couple times I had to go to church with them, and that was just like 1 hour and it's over. This is not like that. This was like 2.5 hours, and then just like 2 more hours of schmoozing afterward. You gotta talk with everybody. And I remember I went to church with him, and I got home it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. And my dad was just like, "What? You took him out for that long? He missed the whole first football game." So I didn't grow up in a church, going, situation. But I did read the whole Bible when I was in high school, but I never really got anything out of it. I think I was kind of scared that I was going to go to hell. So I wanted to try to figure this out, which I really wasn't able to do. But later, I kind of moved away from it, and but I do remember more than once I had heard of Joseph Atwill's theory of Caesar's Messiah from 2005. I hadn't read the book, but I heard about the theory like kind of right when it came out. And the major theory is, the Romans wrote the New Testament. It was written by the Caesars. And, they were the people who had the ability and the motive and the means to do it. And Atwill shows how the New Testament corresponds in a great manner with a lot of Roman literature. And that's kind of where I came in as an adult, is hearing a couple different conversations where somebody brought up, hey, there is not a single book other than the Bible from the whole 1st century that actually corroborates the existence of Jesus. And I've heard at least this happened at least twice, where there was another person listening and they said, "Oh, well, what about Josephus?" So to me, that meant that it's kind of like a trigger answer. Like the Christians have learned that answer is what they are supposed to deploy when they hear that criticism. Like there is no other source other than the New Testament to actually mention Jesus. And they say, "Oh, but what about Josephus?" And I had problems with that, because I knew that Josephus wrote in a much later period and that he wasn't an eyewitness to the events. He was writing, he wrote the War of the Jews in the 70s AD, and he wrote Antiquities of the Jews in the 90s AD. And in the 70s, he just mentions the name of Jesus kind of in passing. An offhand comment in a 7-volume book, just 1/2 of a sentence. And then in Antiquities of the Jews, there's about a paragraph. which is sandwiched between two other paragraphs that do not relate to the do not explicitly relate to the two paragraphs before or after. But I didn't realize how much the Christians are stepping in it when they use Josephus, because I must have gone later, in a later period, to kind of figure that out. Who is Josephus, and what is that a legitimate source, or what is it? And like, what does it say? And then you just fall down the rabbit hole, because Josephus, he has 4 books, 4 sets of books, because the Wars of the Jews is 7 volumes. Then he has an autobiography called Vita. He has a book called Against Appian, and then he has his like 20 or 22 volume Antiquities of the Jews. So really he has 31 books or so, about 30 books. But in his autobiography, he explains that he was originally a Jewish general in the War of the Jews. It was the Jews versus the Romans. Judea was a colony of the Romans, or a province, or whatever, under the control of the Roman Empire. The Herods were puppet kings of Judea, but they answered to Caesar in Rome. And Josephus was a reluctant general, because he felt like there's no way the Jews are going to beat the Romans in this war, because the Romans are so powerful. And so at one point, Josephus surrenders, and he surrenders to General Vespasian of the Romans. And when he does so, he has 2 epiphanies. The first is that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews. And so he defected to the Romans. And so he lent his support to the Romans. And then he said, I am a prophet, and I foresee you, Vespasian, are one day going to become emperor. And in 69 AD, a year or 2 later, Vespasian did become emperor. And when he did, he hooked up Josephus, and he pardoned him, and he brought him to Rome with him as the court historian, one of the court historians, and he adopted him into his own family, which is called the Flavians, the Flavian dynasty of Caesars, which includes Vespasian, his sons Titus and Domitian, from 69 until 96 AD. And so when the Christians are saying that Josephus corroborates the existence of Jesus, it's not true, because Josephus is an agent of the Romans. And so it's one of dozens of pieces of evidence that I have seen that Christians use the evidence to support their theory or their belief, but the evidence actually fits better with the Roman hypothesis, with the Romans did it hypothesis. The Romans wrote the Gospels, and Josephus is a Roman. And so he would have had plenty of incentive to corroborate the existence of Jesus if the existence of Jesus was a psychological operation, a piece of wartime propaganda against the Jews by the Romans. The Romans were tired of the Jews insurrecting and revoluting all over the place for over 100 years. And Vespasian and Titus were both wounded in the war. And they wanted to come up with a Jesus, a Jew, a Jewish hero, a Jewish savior, a Jewish Messiah who believed in turning the other cheek, and in being a prince of peace, in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, in walking an extra mile with the Romans' backpack on, and in noticing that the Roman slave owner has the greatest faith in all Judea, and many more pro-Roman things that Jesus does in the Gospels. But what's more is that when you read Josephus, you recognize that whoever wrote Josephus, whether it was one person, many people, because I find his story to be very dubious, but whether it was his story or multiple people, or whether he had help, or whether it was an alias, not sure, many different theories on that from this emerging hypothesis. But whoever wrote it also wrote the Gospels. And this can be seen by all of the parallels between the two. And the parallels cut both ways. It's kind of like they're in a little bit of a conversation with each other. Whoever wrote one wrote the other. They go back and forth. They're intended to be read together, even in some places. And the parallels are thick, detailed, and well hidden. Many of them are. Many of them are brilliant, and in the most evil kind of way. And, evil genius was at work by the Romans, who wrote this psychological warfare that we call the New Testament. And the Gospels were the part that was written by Josephus. Josephus's children, who I think wrote much of the rest of the New Testament, other than the epistles, which were written by Josephus's younger foster brother named Pliny the Younger. Normally it's thought that the epistles were written earlier, but they were written much later, about 100 to 110 AD. Revelation wasn't written until the 130s, and that was written by one of Josephus's sons. And several authors believe that Josephus was actually a guy named Arius Piso, who was from the powerful Piso Roman family. They were called the Little Caesars, and Arius Piso was kind of like a shadow emperor for Vespasian and Titus. But Michael Menescott's book, what he does is he comes up with a graph, and he maps out the parallels between the book of Luke, 24 chapters on the vertical axis, and the 7 volumes of the Wars of the Jews, 694 paragraphs on the horizontal axis. Whenever he finds a parallel, and this came through like 4 years of poring over these texts, looking for these things, he located 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. And he plotted a point every time, put a dot on the paper every time that he found a match. And after doing that, he recognized that the pattern was a pattern. It wasn't just noise. It wasn't just a bunch of random dots, but it was 250 dots that made 5 Latin letters, APTVS. Basically meaning that the Romans, not only did they write the Gospels, but they actually signed their name to it. And so I think that's earth-shattering discovery, personally. And especially once you read Menescott's and you go through these parallels one at a time. And that's what we're about to do right now. This is a fairly long parallel. Hopefully we can get to the end of it here. We started a little bit yesterday. Now, there's Menescott's uses a little bit background information, sometimes from the Old Testament, sometimes from Revelation, sometimes from the epistles, sometimes from the other synoptic gospels or John, and also from various other translations of the Wars of the Jews, and also of Josephus's other books. But let's try out this set of parallels. From the perspective of the Romans coming to reclaim Jerusalem, which had revolted from them, Jerusalem is conveniently aligned with the description in the Jewish holy text, which reads, and that's coming from Isaiah chapter 1, verses 1, verse 21, and verse 62. A vision of Jerusalem. How has the faithful city become a harlot? Jerusalem, the Lord's bride. And Menescott says this equates Jerusalem as being an adulterous bride. And it is a theme repeated several times throughout the Old Testament. So that's just kind of background. Now we go to Jewish War, paragraph 545. That's book 5, chapter 3, verse 3. The Jews at Jerusalem went out to the women's towers of Jerusalem, the tower that the Old Testament refers to as an adulteress, or Jerusalem that the Old Testament refers to as an adulteress, and threw stones at their own people and pretended to be vulnerable. The Roman soldiers attacked. However, Titus gave the order not to. And then the Jews surrounded them and threw stones at them. Now we move forward a little bit to Jewish War 562, book 5, chapter 6, paragraph 3. Titus, who is to be revealed later as being both deified as a god and also the son of a deified god, has his ballistae, or catapults, around the valleys with Jerusalem in the middle. Titus's catapults bend down to the ground to have a stone put on them, and then lift up, casting stones at Jerusalem. Again, what the Old Testament refers to as the adulteress, or harlot. It also describes how the Jews were unable to operate their own catapults, meaning the Jews cannot cast stones, so they perished or were removed. Now we go to Jewish War 637. The Romans set the city on fire as far as Siloam. The Jews were by then a kind of prisoner already. Now we go forward 4 more paragraphs and go on for about 8 or 9 paragraphs. And implicitly, Titus gave a priest called Jesus. Now, in Jewish War, there are several characters named Jesus, and they all kind of parody the Jesus in the Gospels to a certain extent. But so one of the Jesuses is a priest. Gave a priest called Jesus the oath of Caesar. So he came and gave Titus the veils, garments, gold, and precious stones, and the treasurer was forced to help. So he, Jesus, obtained a pardon from Titus. Titus's banks were finished in 18 days, and when certain towers fell or yielded to the battering rams, the tyrants were consequently ejected from the unassailable towers too, by God himself, or by divine judgment. And they were ejected from the Tower of Siloam. It was God who helped eject these tyrants from those towers. And Titus freed those who had been bound by them before entirely demolishing the city. And there's a description of the destruction of Jerusalem as so complete, it left no sign that it had been inhabited. Okay, now we go to the book of Luke, chapter 13, verses 2 through 17. This describes Galilean sinners who are sinners above all, the most sinful. Unless you repent, you shall likewise perish or suffer divine judgment. And immediately it mentions the Tower of Siloam falling on it, falling on the sinners above all. In the synagogue on the Sabbath, behold, a woman, a woman who Satan has kept bound. And he's, in parentheses, he says this wording allows no interpretation that the woman was a sinner, or allows uninterpretation that the woman was a sinner, with an infirmity of 18 years, who could not lift herself up. And Jesus said, "Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity," being freed from her bonds. And since she is implied as being a sinner, it follows that she obtained a pardon from Jesus. And then he also brings in John chapter 8, verses 3 through 10. The Jews brought an adulteress, a woman who was a sinner, and set her in the midst, surrounded to Jesus, asking, should the adulteress be stoned? But Jesus stooped down to the ground as though he heard them not, and he lifted himself up. Jesus said, "He that is the first without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her." Meaning, the Jews cannot cast a stone. Again, Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground. So they left one by one, leaving Jesus with her I'm sorry, I cannot read that word. Her alone in the midst. Then Jesus lifted up himself and saw there was no one left. None of the Jews remained. But the woman, he asked her. Nobody remained but the woman. He asked her, "Where are your accusers? Has no man condemned you?" And she said, "No man, Lord." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you." So Jesus pardoned her. Now, in the remarkable parallel above, the Gospel of John offers a detailed parody of Titus's siege of Jerusalem, involving the prospect of a stoning and Jesus' pardoning a sinful woman who could not move. This enables us to link the story, and I'm very sorry, but I have to turn the page, which could take just a second, but the last words were enables us to link the story. Oh boy. Link the story in John to that in Luke, which also involves the prospect of stoning and Jesus pardoning a sinful woman who similarly could not escape, enabling us to plot the location on the chart. The Old Testament concept of Jerusalem being both an adulteress and a bride is being built on here, and is used to suggest that the reluctant Jerusalem is, in a sense, Rome's rightful bride. Notice also that in Jesus' story, this harlot had been kept bound by Satan, which, as I will demonstrate later, aligns with a carefully hidden message that Jerusalem is being equated with Hades and the Jewish leaders with Satan. But to return to the parallel tabulated above, the story of he who is without sin cast the first stone is remarkable in how graphically it parodies the stoning of Jerusalem. The harlot is put in the middle of them to be stoned. just as Jerusalem, the harlot, is in the midst, surrounded by Titus's catapult engines. And then Jesus starts repeatedly bending down to the floor and straightening up again, evoking the motion of Titus's catapults, before awarding the victim a pardon, mirroring how Titus pardons the other Jesus. The riddle is fairly transparent, since in Jewish war, the one who throws the stones is Titus, on the basis that it says the Jews can't get their catapults to work. So, following Jesus' mantra of let he who is innocent cast the first stone leads us straight to the message that Titus is the person that is innocent. All right, that's pretty interesting. Indeed, scholars familiar with Jewish war will know that its author is at pains to suggest that Titus was not responsible for the fall of Jerusalem, and that he intended to make peace and save the Jews' sacred temple, but that the Jews destroyed each other and even set fire to the temple themselves. So the objective behind the covert propaganda message is identical to the objective behind the overt propaganda message. They both aim to promote loyalty to Emperor Titus. Okay. Well, I think we're going to stop it there because he's going on to the next parallel after this one. So we'll start with that next parallel tomorrow. This is pretty interesting parallel. It doesn't, there's more there than meets the eye when you read it. And, you know, he's incorporating several different texts. You know, it's not all just coming from Luke, and it's not all coming from the same paragraph in Wars of the Jews. I'd like to see kind of how he plotted those points, but he usually doesn't show you how he plotted the points until about every 3 to 5 examples. So we'll probably find out how he plotted the points in a few episodes from now. But you know, how many dots did that get? Did that get 3 dots, or did it get 5 dots, or just 1? I don't know. But there is a pretty thick set of parallels there. I wouldn't call it the best one that I've seen. It's, I don't think, in the top 5 that I've seen so far, and we're only 30% of the way through the book. Okay, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.